Hello, people. This is Attican, the Lonely Ronin, Addy Ads. We are going to finish up Miss Dufresne's account. I just ate breakfast slash lunch. And we're going to see what she has to say to end off these. I think there's 2 or 3 chapters left. So let us continue. So she had just been moved to Thailand to finish some Thai massage certification training. She is staying with a Wisconsinite, actually, so a girl from Wisconsin. And Jeffrey and Glenn had just proposed to her this baby making idea of her having a baby with Jeffrey and signing over the rights of that baby to Epstein. So that's where we were. Chapter 21. It was an average evening getting ready in front of the bathroom mirror on just an average Sunday. Though unbeknownst to us girls, as we sat there chatting away carelessly, this night was already written in the stars for me. It was a very long time ago now, when I was still a young child, that I sat looking up to those same stars from my bedroom window with my hands pressed tightly together as I cried for God to hear my prayers. All I asked him for was death. My precious life was already such a hopeless battle that I felt too small to fight alone for. Begging him to deliver me from this cruel world, I would pray for all of my pain would to away for good. My only clause in my prayers was the possibility that there was somebody in this wide world that I was meant to love, something much bigger than I could have even imagined yet. This invocation of mine was forgotten about long ago, now until tonight. I wish I had known that night, as I sat crying beneath the stars, that it would all be different one day, and that I hadn't sold myself short to the accustomed lifestyle I was brought up to believing was acceptable. It was this night for my very soul was about to cosmically collide with the man I was always meant for, the man my heart already belonged to and would know from the instant we met. This night would be the first day to the beginning of my new life to come. I blushed my cheeks and put on my mascara before me and my girlfriend headed out to hit the town. We were dressed to kill and looking for something to do when we ran into a few of our classmates at one of our favorite drinking spots. They were meeting up for some drinks before a Mai Tai kickboxing tournament. It sounded like fun when they invited us along to watch it with them. The massive crowd lined the street where the fight was being held, and once I got inside the arena, it was push and shove to trying to find a spot to watch from. The friends that were hanging out there were meeting up with another group of guys that were training for the kickboxing tournaments that we were watching. Then it happened, comma, there's supposed to be a comma there. It was the first moment I laid eyes on the man that would love me for the rest of my life. I wasn't expecting the most amazing time of my life to happen right there and then, but it did, and I would never be the same again. Destiny fell right smack under my lap, and there was no stopping it. It wasn't just his smoldering appeal that was obvious at first sight. It was the entire package of mannerism and chivalry that made him stand out of the crowd. Stepping right out of the pages of the fairy tales I used to read, he was nothing like I had ever come to know before. Watching him from a close distance, he was playfully shadowboxing one of the guys from my massage class. And it was at that moment that the handsome stranger first caught me staring at him. From top to toe, this athletically built man was intriguing to watch. I couldn't take my eyes off him, like I was magnetically drawn to his power of attraction. He further interested me when he wasn't acting like the majority of harping dogs that would jump at the eyes I was giving him now. Instead, he coyly played hard to get, making me work for any conversation with him. This guy knows some game. The fight started, and the men were going berserk, screaming at the fighters in the ring, offering either fighter their support or discrimination, depending on whom they were battling for. It was like watching a primitive scene out of the days when the cavemen ruled the earth, but it was as equally alluring to watch unfold. The sweat, the blood, and the absolute brute fascination of it all. After the fight and all the men revved up from the fight, I suggested that we all head to the pizza joint in front of the Sis Hotel, where I was staying, for a late night snack. I made it my goal to make myself known to this appealing stranger. In the tuk-tuk on the way there, a tuk-tuk is a drawn carriage that is native to Thailand. I think donkeys are the animals they use. On the way there, I made sure I sat next to Robbie. Scooting my knees closer and closer to him on the short ride, he continued his chase by moving further away from me, a game of cat and mouse that I loved. When he answered back the array of my questions, he had the cutest Aussie accent that drove me absolutely wild. Gradually, we got to know each other better over a pie of pepperoni pizza and 2 cans of Coke. To me, he might as well have been the only other person in the restaurant. She knew he had my undivided attention, and I think he liked it. There was no one like him that I had ever met before, and I knew that there was no one other who could make me feel the way that I felt at the first sight of him. Being charming and suave was all an accidental front. It was easy to read him. Immediately, it wasn't hard to see his sweet side. Holding the door and pulling out my chair at the restaurant, I was already smitten. After pizza, he walked me up across the street to my hotel, where we made plans to meet up again. There was no kiss goodnight or anything like that. He was too polite for that. He wanted to prove himself different, and different he was. Walking through the hotel's revolving doors, I watched as he walked away, and when he was finally out of sight, I sung is the past participle, my way up to my room. Floating on cloud 9, I was free-falling into a deep pit of love. The next day, I attended my class as usual, but was not able to concentrate like I normally did. Too excited about when I'd be seeing Robbie that night again. As I walked out of class that afternoon, even the teacher noticed the difference in my performance and asked me if I was feeling well. On top of the world, actually, I smiled back at the old instructor, and it wasn't far from the exact truth either. I hadn't ever felt the churning of butterflies in my stomach, and the constant thoughts of anyone else like this before. My girlfriend and I got a tuk-tuk back together as we usually did after school, and I couldn't shut up about the night before. She was laughing at my girlishness, telling me that anyone who just met me would think I had never been let out before. But little did she know that I had more than my fair share in experience with men, and never had I ever come across anyone that could make me feel this way. And what spun me out even more was that it was such an instant attraction. Never considering myself a person who believed in the existence of love at first sight, but a true romantic deep at heart, I couldn't help but believe in it now. He was the walking proof of it. Waiting for me in the hotel was the very person I couldn't stop entertaining the thought of all day long. There he was, looking ever so fine, standing in front of me now. The whole entire world faded away, and all that was left for the moment was this complete stranger I had only met last night, but somehow captivated the very essence of my heart. There was no need for me to try and act cool now. He already knew I was snagged hook, line, and sinker. Smiling all the way up to the many stories in the elevator up to my room, he took notice of the posh decor of the hotel. You should see where I'm staying. This is a royal palace compared to it. His first impression of me automatically thought I was going to be a spoiled, high maintenance girl that had money coming in from a parent's hefty trust fund. Casually, he got to find out through many deep and meaningfully conversations that my life's grim story wasn't that pretty at all. For some reason beyond my knowledge, I had the need to tell this stranger almost everything. Wanting to be judged and looked down upon for everything about my life that I knew was wrong, and being the first time I had spoken about my years with Jeffrey to anyone honestly like that ever before, I felt like I deserved punishment. He offered me no judgment, instead only gave me his warmth and compassion as he wrapped his strong arms around me, making me feel so meager and small but so safe at the same time, encouraging me to see the worthiness of myself and leave that life behind. He adorned me with a kind of love that I wasn't accustomed to. He took me in and made me feel so at home. It was like I had known him my whole life. I couldn't bear to be without him another second while I was away on this dream holiday. When he wasn't training for Mai Tai tournaments and I wasn't in school, nobody would ever see us, two enveloped in each other in my hotel room to care about anything else. Which is why I asked him to come stay at my hotel with me, seeing he's never at his own anyways. My girlfriend was soon departing back to Wisconsin, making my room more than available for him. Enchanted by his words and tender touch, the way he made love to me was again like nothing I had experienced before. Even down to after sex, as I had been routinely instructed by Jeffrey to get up for a warm washcloth to clean his genitals afterwards. He refused it, telling me I was no longer a slave and he didn't want me acting like one. He'd just rather lay down together afterwards and repeat our sweet nothings with many adjoining kisses. On our third night together, with nothing but the bed sheets between us, we had spent all night looking into each other's eyes, sharing such an undeniable passion for one another. In the deepest caverns of my heart, I knew this man would give me what I had never experienced before: true love. We were still laying in each other's arms when the orange and pink sunrise began to rise slowly through the peaks of my room's windows, enticing me to come feel the freshness of the morning's chill. Only the bed sheets were still wrapped around my body as I went to the balcony. It was overlooking the city in a valley surrounded by mountainous tops. My thoughts began to rampage through my head, and I knew this could only be a dream for me. It was getting serious now, too serious for the life that I led back home. As if he'd sensed my anxiety, Robbie walked up behind me and wrapped his strong arms around my waistline, gently kissing my neckline and pausing with his ever so thoughtful stares, and gave me the exact opening that I needed to expel my thoughts. Back home, as you already know, I'm going back to someone else. It's my job, and as much as I really like you, this guy that I kind of see is going to expect me to be putting him first. I am so sorry to say all of this after such a wonderful few days we have spent together. But you need to know this thing happening between us can't get any more serious than what we have for now. I'm so sorry. I looked down at the floor with nothing else I could say to alter his perception of me now that I had told him the truth, and it had never dawned on me that thought he wouldn't be out the door before I could even finish my sentence. But he continued to surprise me with his efforts to make me believe we were more than just friends with his summer crush. You see, your problem is that you don't see that what I'm looking for at right here in front of me. A beautiful girl who is completely lost in a game that she has no control over. Get out of it now. Take my hand and follow me back to my home in Australia. Excuse me. I heard what he had said, but I found it hard to comprehend what he was actually talking about. What? I asked him with a look of confusion on my face. You're nobody's property. You can do this. Marry me. His statements got more and more profound as he went on. Repeating the question, he got on one knee and proposed again. Jenna, I am in love with you and want the rest of my life making you happy. Please don't go back to him. I know that I am the only one for you, and I will always treat you right. He paused for another second and repeated his question. Jenna, will you please marry me? My hands fell into my face after that, and without even letting myself think through the answer, I let my heart do all the talking. Looking back up at him, I said, yes. I almost shouted the answer at him, as if saying it louder would give me the word more meaning. Wanting to believe him and everything that he was saying felt like a vacation from all the suffering and loneliness that I had endured over a lifetime of abuse and degradation. But knowing what you want and getting it are two different things that rarely went hand in hand. Or so I thought. All I knew from the brief period I had known this stranger was that he was offering me a life and love down on unfamiliar path, and it was a gamble to believe a complete stranger, but somehow I knew he was right. My heart was beating so loud I thought I was going to jump right out of my chest. With the earnesty in my reply, he picked me up in his strong arms and took me back to the bed and reiterated his words in a more physical sense this time. Never had I felt loved like this before, so swept off my feet and unable to even think, eat, or do anything for that matter, which would involve leaving the hotel room without him. Every day after school would be my Robbie waiting to take me back to the hotel room for another night's passionate rendezvous. But a few nights after his proposal, he had another surprise in store. He didn't just want to get married someday. He wanted to get married now, this week even. He's pouncing. I walked into the fabric store and was attended to by several seamstresses who were already be expecting my arrival. I was there to design and have fun designing my own dream wedding dress. While I was busy picking out fabrics and having measurements taken, I would look away for a moment only to catch his tender eyes staring in my direction. Such adoration behind his looks. Could it be real? I would often ponder to myself, just hoping for the gamble I was taking to work out. I still had to believe in something better than what I was accustomed to, and here he was, right smack dab in front of me. Giggling at all the lace and frills they were trying to dress me up in, looking more like an antique porcelain doll than anything else. I closed my eyes and pictured the day that I thought would never come. Starting to imagine the kind of dress I would like to wear, I envisioned a simple sleekness, a complimentary figure hugging gown with a small train, but long enough to distinct it as an actual wedding dress. After we settled on what we were going to wear for the big day, we would next have to decide where we would hold the ceremony. Not before celebrating the entire week beforehand, though. We started our honeymoon early, celebrating every night, spending our time between my hotel room and sending our heads spinning on the dance floor at many different clubs. Only with each other in sight, the dance floor was ours. We were out to give each other something to remember each night by. I whispered all of the things I couldn't wait to do to him once we got back to the hotel room. And watching him heat up on the dance floor, I was never able to get enough of him, driving me crazy. Like a thirst I was unable to quench, His lips were like a fountain of deep springs that I could never reach the bottom of. 7 days, exactly a week after his proposal, I sat on my bed in distress, contemplating what I would say to the man who I was about to call. There was no nice way to go about it. I couldn't last forever with him, and this was my one chance to get out of it for good. I was leaving him, never to return to him ever again. I just had to go ahead and do it. Part of me was hoping he'd be at least a little happy for me and the sudden change in my life's direction. But the other part of me knew I was already asking too much of him. Calling his office in New York, I was transferred to Jeffrey's personal office. He picked up the phone on the third ring, pausing before I could get any of the words to come out of my mouth. But I mustered up my courage eventually and gave him my prepared spiel, beginning with how much I had appreciated everything he has done for me up until this point. I hoped he would be understanding, but he just wanted me to hurry up and get to the point. Trying to contagiously pass on my excitement through the phone lines, I finally screamed out, "I'm getting married. Can you believe it?" No reply was given, only a silence on the other end. I went on to tell him about Robbie and how I had fallen madly in love with him over the last amazing few days we'd spent together. The absence of sound made my thoughts begin to run wild, and to get some response, I had to ask him what he thought about everything I was telling him. Finally, a few seconds later, his reaction to the news sunk in, and his only and final reply until many years to come was, "Have a good life." With that statement, he slammed it down the phone receiver, leaving only an echo of the dial tone to answer back to. I was too paralyzed. Woman. Oh my gosh. So she finally used the word to, but she used it incorrectly. Anyway, I was too paralyzed from the shocking response. What have I just done? Was the first thing that entered my thoughts. Overwhelmed with guilt, I felt like I was falling down a deep and dark hole. And then the tears began to flood in. Here I was, standing at the dawn of a new happy life for myself, and I couldn't see past how bad I had let Jeffrey down, not yet seeing the hole he had on me. Like my knight on a white horse, in came my hero to soothe my somberness. He rushed over to the bed where I was beating myself up mentally and wiped the falling tears from my cheeks. I take it that it didn't go well, huh? Sniffling through my sobs, I managed to tell him that it doesn't matter anymore. All I care about is you and leaving all of that life behind me. I wrapped my arms around him and he asked me in a half-joking voice, "Why are you crying?" You got me almost laughing now, too. I guess it's just so scary taking such a huge plunge away from what I'm used to and taking such a big move to another country. It's all just so different, and I'm just trying to comprehend everything that is happening in such a short time. Always out to lift my spirits, his next comments made me gush in laughter. You think that was a hard phone call? Wait until I call my Sicilian mother. Watch this. I'll know exactly what she'll say. First, it'll be a saga about how I'm killing her with my selfish actions. Then it'll be how she's going to kill herself for doing such a terrible job raising normal children. Don't worry, though. She'll love every second of it. Wogs thrive off... Wogs? What does that mean? Wogs thrive off the drama in their lives and off everybody else's for that matter. Wog in the UK is a derogatory and racially offensive slang word referring to a non-white or darker-skinned white person. I see. I didn't know that. Sicilian mother. Da, da, da. He was pretty much on the dot when he told me how she'd react to the news. In the end, after relentlessly trying to change his mind, she sighed. If it was going to be anybody to do something as crazy as this, Robbie, it would be you. It wasn't a blessing as much, but at least she wasn't threatening suicide any longer. Calling the closest of our families the night before our wedding to share with them our announcement wasn't celebrated by any members of either sides. That didn't concern us one bit. My parents took it well, considering their only daughter was marrying a foreign man that they didn't know from the next guy on the street. And to top it off, I was moving to Australia permanently. When I asked my dad many years later why they hadn't put up a fight, he just replied simply that nobody expected it to last very long. Fair enough, I thought. I don't think anyone did at first, even us at our toughest times. We were a rare attribute these days in the numb era we've all been accustomed to living in, turning nothing into something, which I had also come to realize that was the most precious gift in life: love. Falling asleep was easy to do in his arms that night. I laid my head on top of his chest, listening to the drum of his beating heart. I had never felt like I was more at home than ever before in my life. He pulled me gently in closer to him, letting me know that he was there for me even when the lights went out and the thoughts would usually creep in. Amazing how he knew what I needed without even asking for it. Wishing for something like this my whole life, I thought I was being such a fool in so many ways. But I was so wrong. The way his pretty eyes looked at me with such an understanding and compassionate sincerity made me want to trust his words and believe the love that he was offering me was indeed real. The next morning, Robbie was up and out of bed early to pick up our tailored wedding suits and dresses for a big day at Doi Sept Temple. His best friend from high school days that was traveling with him from Australia met him in the hotel lobby at 7 o'clock. He was going to be joining us for the wedding as Robbie's best man. He still hadn't been able to find black shoes to go with the suit, so after he dropped off my dress back to me, he was off again to try and find himself a pair of decent-looking ones. Overjoyed with excitement, I was thrilled from the second I kissed Robbie goodbye for the last time before we were officially married. Looking in the same mirror only a week ago, I was now a different person. I felt like I was plunging into a bottomless abyss. Here I go, I thought to myself, as I plunged out the door, letting the butterflies in my stomach carry me all the way to my nearly husband. I had to go to the beautician's that morning for my pre-wedding makeup and dressing. The ladies who were doing my hair and face at the salon did a great job making me feel so beautiful for my special occasion that every girl dreams about their whole entire life. Requesting simplicity at best, not wanting to go overboard with all of the wedding apparel, they tied my long hair up into a knot, wrapping around it a veil of flowers made up of baby's breath and small yellow and purple budding flowers. I couldn't have dreamt it up better myself, and when I met my husband-to-be at the bottom of the mountain, he stood before me speechless. "You look so beautiful," were his first words that his mouth formed, almost whispering them. He took my hand, and we walked into the skylift together. Behind us followed an interpreter that Robbie hired to translate the Buddhist monk's ceremony speech for us, English-only speakers, and then his best friend, who only moments before gave him the best man speech about being the last who gave the best man speech about being the last chance to walk away from this and not get married to a girl he hardly knew. But my Robbie wouldn't hear a word of it. He already made up his mind the instant he proposed, and I said yes. Excuse me. I was born to be with this girl, he told his best mate. All right then, let's go do this then. Once he knew Robbie was sure in his decision, He was more than ecstatic for him. We were slowly lifted up the tremendous mountainside, surrounded by the floral green carpet of mossy grass that covered the earthly skyscraper in failing fog. It was like being carried to heaven or the closest thing to it. Taking my eyes off the scenery and catching him adoringly staring at me again, I welled up with unstoppable tears. I am so lucky. Is this really happening? He squeezed my hands and replied back, "You are the only one for me. I love you," relieving the anxiety written all over my tear-stained face. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22. Getting out of the carriage, we were greeted by good fortune from the gods above. A sun shower cascaded over us as we advanced into the ancient holy temple. My tears of joy dried, and my happiness was glowing for all to see. The many visitors to the temple stopped and took photos of the passing bride and groom. No other foreigners had been married there, and certainly not anyone wearing traditional Western attire. Such a sight had never been seen behind these religious walls. We became a permanent icon at the temple. The ceremony was done in the Buddhist customs according to their ancestral accordance, and translated for us in our own language. Both Robbie and I were anointed with a blessing for the monk, with a splash of water and 7 sacramental bracelets, each one representing another meaning to the longevity of our union together. We signed our names in the Buddhist wedding registry of Doi Kept Temple and officially became Mr. and Mrs. Roberts, at least officially in our hearts, knowing the laws of Australia only recognize certified weddings, meaning when we got back to his homeland, we'd have to make a run for the courthouse. This was our real wedding, though, perfect down to every detail. Walking up to the highest point of the temple to the balcony, hanging over the edge of the cliffside overlooking the city of Chiang Mai, we knew we had found the perfect spot to recite our vows of love to each other. Providing everything for me and more than I could ever ask for, his vows were to love me unconditionally until death do we part, shelter me from all the cruelty in the world that I was so accustomed to, and to be like the bear, because the bear never forgets. Tears once again streamed down from my eyes as he made this moment unforgettable. Wiping the mascara fading underneath my eyelids whilst giggling at my embarrassment, I took his hands back into mine again and gave him the vows that were the sacred, prepared words from my heart. My ears were thundering at the sound of a million horses' hooves descending downhill. My heart was beating so fast my words barely trembled out of my mouth when I began to tell him how much he had changed my whole life around and how I would dedicate my entire being to loving him and only him until I blew my final breath. I meant every word that I said to him. This was it for me, wanting nothing more out of life than to be with someone like him, to raise a few kids together and grow old on the front porch, letting the days fade us by. I knew it probably sounds boring to most, and it would have to me as well many years ago. But after the life I led, I had enough experience in the real world for my liking. Now all I want to do is enjoy the remaining days of my life for what it is, a simple and satisfying existence. Our day was so special, but not only to us, even to the monk that married us. Upon our descent down the lifts, he asked if he could take a photo with the bride and groom in front of their symbolic Liberty Bell, signifying the union between East and West. It represented a lot for us, too. It was the commencement of a new life together, and just the beginning of battling each other's past demons together. Kissing the bridal party goodbye, who were just the local girls I had met on some of the many nights out having fun. I threw my arranged bouquet of Thailand's white wedding flowers mixed with colorful orchids to the screaming Thai women behind me, and we were given one last tradition to take with us: the release of caged doves. It was such an incredible gesture, especially for me. Symbolizing their freedom as well as mine, I opened the cage's door to let them free to decide their own fates. As the wings on the birds began to spread open and they took their final descent into the blue skies, granting themselves freedom, I knew mine had finally come too. The relevance of watching them fly away and how I had perceived my own day of marriage related to the identical feeling of fleeing an entrapment of my own kind. I was liberated from the bonds of slavery I had come to know over the many years I had spent with my fair share of greedy, perverted old men, only to have serendipity mend my scars with the powerful healing of what true love has to endeavor on. As customary in the romance novels I had read as a young girl, he picked me up in the hallway before our hotel suite and carried me over the threshold, poofy dress and all. My arms were tightly squeezed around his neck, never once taking my eyes off of him until he revealed yet another sweet surprise. Besides the cleaners tidying up my room while we were gone, they were also given instructions by none other than the groom himself to pick the petals off the stems of red roses to place on our bed in the shape of a giant heart. The rose petals led the way to where we consummated our love physically, and it was undeniably the first time in my life I had ever really been made love to. Hours had passed by before we thought about anything else besides one's words of arousal, tantalizing touches, and lingering kisses. We ate a quiet dinner at a local restaurant and went straight back to the arms of each other again. So profoundly in love with one another, it was the ideal display of what the honeymoon period should have to show for. It was crazy, young and energetic, just what it should be between two blossoming lovers. The following morning, we left the Princess Hotel, no longer under any of Jeffrey's financial privileges or control, so to speak, continuing our love spree in another dwelling of our own accord. 3 days later, when we finally showed our face for the first time since checking in downstairs in the new hotel lobby, besides to request fresh sheets and towels, the entire staff of the hotel had a good laugh at our expenditure. From the reaction, it must have been nice to see a couple so affectionately fond of each other. Now we wanted to have another type of fun. Robbie had visited a tourist agent by himself before we got hitched to book a honeymoon itinerary for us to explore Thailand and beyond together. Another surprise he had in store for me. We left early in the morning and joined the crowded bus for our journey beyond the border of Thailand to a village in the war-torn nation of Laos. When we got through the extremely armored visa office 8 hours off the beaten path, we then had to cross a flooding river from a recent heavy downpour of rain in a slim banana boat that looked like it could barely handle our weight, let alone the excess of my luggage that Robbie was so kind to trek around the world for me. I lost my spot. Give me a second. Robbie was... Oh, there we go. Unbelievably, we did make it to the other side, only to find that my honeymoon in the tropics wasn't exactly how it had been explained to me. Naked children ran through the dirty streets, with one boy that decided to release his bladder on the pathway we were walking as we passed by him on the way to our hotel. My doubts of his choice and destinations became apparent after that night. Robbie was getting hungry after we hadn't eaten the entire duration of the trip. And being such a rugged man, he could digest just about anything. Deciding to stop on the side of the road, he ordered some kind of seafood dish. Daring, I thought, settling for some toast and jam, something safer. Then I saw the lady behind the counter dip some plates in a dirty bucket full of dirty water and then rinse in another bucket of water that didn't look as bad as the previous mud rinse one, and then further proceeded to put my toast and his food on top of them, serving it all to us in clear view. I couldn't bring myself to even fathom it. I can't eat that, I mouthed in a hushed voice, trying to quietly make my point clear, but was made public with his loudmouth outburst of "Why not? Looks fine to me. You have to try and eat something. You haven't eaten all day." I knew it was just his caring side that was trying to force me, and to top it off, he is Sicilian, and they're all about eating. So it was our first debate, and now we were officially married, with many more marital conflicts to subsequently follow. Two headstrong and stubborn people, both with the right intentions, but still recovering from old wounds. It was only natural and important that we fought just as much as we had passionate love together, countlessly proving to one another the true intentions of each other's loves, but sometimes in not so seemingly actions. Finally arriving at the hotel, it was like a scene out of a horror flick. We were showed up to the room that looked like someone had been brutally killed in. What? The bed sheets were torn apart, and the bed was stained with blood from some poor helpless victim. Nearly vomiting at the pure sight of the room and the stench that accompanied it, I was now tearing at the thought of even staying here for a single moment longer. "No way," I told my new husband, and from the tone of my voice, he knew I was serious. Not that I was not denying the fact that I had never been an outback type of girl. I was fine with that impression. I am no snob, but give me the simple luxuries of a clean bed and a shower, then I'll make myself at home. But this was just the epitome of filth and even possibly an act of a horrendous event. But who knows? The lady who showed us the room seemed fine with it, passing it off as a hooker on her period. In some ways, that was even worse. Yuck. Okay, Robbie, it's time to go. Now, we were heading back down the hill to the passport center, declaring our passage back into Thailand. Considering us a risk due to the short time we spent crossing the border and back, the officials held us at gunpoint, while others rummaged through our luggage for drugs or whatnot. Finding nothing, of course, they released us and stamped our passports, making us good for another 3 months if we wanted. We were thankful for escaping with our lives alone, although we had nothing to hide, but still an endearing experience nonetheless in the first few days of our honeymoon, of all days. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23. Arriving in Koh Samui for finally a bit of relaxation in the tropics, my idea of how a holiday should be. Sunny, warm, and clean. Well, clean enough. We lived it up like kings for the next 6 weeks, making it an ideal way for two strangers to properly get acquainted. Dancing into the wee hours of the night and making love in the blistering heat of the sunny days, we discovered everything on that island. Mostly being each other. We'd made friends of all sorts, mostly travelers, but everyone the same in being taken aback by our fairy tale romance. With our captivated eyes never straying too far from one another, anyone could easily see the strong chemistry between us. Trying to find the woman in me wasn't difficult, as I took to the bounds of marriage with such ease. No longer a girl, I loved the idea of being a wife and belonging to a husband like Robbie. Marriage was bliss for the duration of our honeymoon period, until we had to ride coach on our way back to Bangkok airport to fly out to Australia. Chatting away with always so much to say to each other, we watched a movie and finally got comfortable leaning up against each other as pillows. We both fell asleep on the long ride, and when we woke up to the sound of the bus's brakes coming to a halt, oh my goodness, we initially realized my purse and Robbie's wallet with all of our money and cards in it was missing. Stranding in the city of Bangkok was frightening enough as it was, but to make matters worse, a lady looking in her mid-70s, scrawny and hunched over from an obvious lack of nutrition, lifted up her skirt to a passerby with a she-male hanging off his arm. I think she means her arm. Hanging off her arm, and began smacking her vagina, blaring out, "Look, no cock, pussy, pussy, only 5 baht. Baht is Thai money." Repeating herself many times over, the man just walked on past as she sat back down on the curb, waiting for the next alluring customer. Robbie and I shook our heads in disgust and disbelief. Things could really be that bad for someone. I would know best. It wasn't far from the life Jeffrey had been training me up for. Completely broke at 2 o'clock in the morning, and with no one to call for help, I panicked right away. Robbie rubbed my back and his tired eyes, trying to make the situation better. Luckily, we had made friends with some really nice people from the resort on the island who gave us about 2,000 baht when they saw how devastated Robbie and I were. With just enough money to rent a really cheap room for the next night at a backpacker's hostel and pay for a taxi to the airport the following day, we were saved. Early in the next morning, we were off in separate planes, since Robbie's ticket was pre-booked and no available seats left for me to join him meant we would be landing in Australia separately. Fortunately, we had found a corresponding flight that arrived within the same hour of each other, but I would have to make a stop over to the Philippines. The lengthy hours of the duration on the flight seemed to stretch on, with only the thoughts of the journey ahead of me. I couldn't wait to get back to my husband's loving arms. The trip was going well, sleeping the majority of the flight until I had to change planes in the Philippines. After the plane landed and before any passenger was allowed to get off, we were handed a declaration statement that informed us that if we were carrying any drugs or weaponry, we would be arrested and face charges with death as the ultimate penalty. Not that I had anything to worry about, but what a thought to willingly sign over your life. I got the chills handing over my signed declaration and traveling documents to the customs officer. Obtaining my passport, he additionally asked to see my departing ticket. No problem, I thought, just as I had done many of times, and I handed over the requested information. The officer looked me over, and I got on the phone immediately, which sounded like a phone call to his superiors, but I couldn't tell since it was in another language. A brief conversation, but long enough to get me thinking. He then called over 2 guards who took me by the arms and brought me into an empty room, but for a desk and 3 chairs to be interrogated. No one would tell me what was going on. They all just scattered around in frenzy, ignoring all of my hysterical inquisitions. Leaving me by myself and alone with my thoughts, I couldn't help but panic, even worse now. This was a total bombshell of confusion on my part. What had I done wrong? Minutes later, a large framed woman in a green uniform entered the room with the guards from before and sat down across from me with a stern look in her eyes. She placed my documents on the desk in between us, not saying a word. She was waiting for me to give her an explanation for something. Can you please tell me what this is about? Have I done something wrong? I asked her politely, trying to restrain any animosity towards her. Her reply sounded as grim as she looked. You have been in Thailand for 3 months, and now you have only a one-way ticket booked to Australia with no visa. What exactly are your plans once you get there, Miss Roberts? To myself, I wondered what business it was to her. Don't people travel with one-way tickets all the time? Knowing I was in no position to be able to say anything like that, or even at all, I just gave in nicely and told her my intentions to travel over there. Crying through my entire explanation, I wasn't sure if I was even going to make my flight now. She had to think about everything I had told her for a moment, deciding whether or not she would grant me permission to meet my husband in Australia or send me back alone to Bangkok. With only time on my side, she had to make a hasty verdict now. One more question had to be answered before I was to let go. She wanted some proof. If you have just got married, can you show me your marriage certificate then? This didn't help my story's credibility at all, seeing that we were married in a Buddhist temple and given woven bracelets instead of certificates. Explaining to her that I didn't have one to show her yet, but was already there, that I would have to obtain a legal marriage certificate through a courthouse upon my arrival in Australia to stay there legally. It was only because of my husband's beliefs we wanted to get married in a Buddhist ceremony. She must have shared a common interest in religion or something like that, as she finally cracked a smile upon the photos of the wedding day that I showed her and carrying in my purse since getting them developed. If she wanted proof, this was all I really had. Handing me back my documents and ticket, I was now free to leave. But she wasn't leaving me much time to run through the airport's terminal to get to my departing plane. Expeditiously bolting through the busy airport, I think we've all been there, my adrenaline was still pumping from the previous encounter with the officials of the Philippines, who had enough power to condemn me if they had felt like it. I caught my plane in the nick of time, and once I was settled in my seat, my thoughts went back to my dear Robbie and how much I was missing him. I was just relieved that I was on my way to be back with him again soon. Looking out the window, I could see the red earth beneath me. As I landed for the last time, I took notice of the first steps I walked off the plane and onto a new soil for the first time. I had so much to be looking forward to in my new homeland. In my heart, I knew this was all I ever wanted. This was going to be my haven. There was another surprise in store for me when 2 elder strangers walked up to me and asked my names. Are you Jenna? Nodding at their question, they gave me their first names and wrapped their arms around my neck. My new mother-in-law then said, "We are Robbie's parents. We wanted to be the first ones who welcomed you to Australia and into our family." It was my in-laws meeting me for the first time. Handing me some balloons and flowers, they even had gifts for their new daughter-in-law. While waiting for Robbie's plane to arrive, we all chatted about many things, like the flight over from Thailand and the scare at the previous airport in the Philippines. I asked them how they knew who to look for. My father-in-law laughed, saying recognizing me was easy from Robbie's detailed description. He told them to look out for a petite young blonde carrying an abundance of luggage. Laughing together over a few more brief conversations of getting to know each other better, they seemed relieved to finally meet me compared to how stressed she sounded in the conversations I overheard Robbie having with her while in Thailand. Watching the arrivals board, I knew Robbie's plane had landed ages ago, but was now waiting for him to get out of customs. It didn't bother me anyhow. I was enjoying getting accompanied with his parents for the first time. Eventually, I saw my husband walking down the runway behind the gates. I just couldn't wait any longer. I ducked underneath the gates and ran all the way up to the runway to jump excitedly into his arms. I wrapped my arms and legs around him, holding on to him for dear life. I just missed him so much. I knew I would never let him go. Theoretically speaking, that is. And I never have, nearly a decade later. Chapter 24. Over the near decade we spent together, Robbie and I shared the common highs and lows that every determined marriage endures. It's taken a lot of hard work and doesn't come without its flaws, but no matter what, it is just perfect for the two of us. He helped me how to remember to smile again, and life has slowly began to sort itself out. They say that time heals all wounds, but what I had experienced in my young years wasn't nearly long enough to let all of the hurt go. Seeking help through many counselors and psychiatrists, I was doing everything I could to deal with the scars and all of the pain left behind. Completely off of any pharmaceuticals since the last day of our honeymoon, and healing my heart with love instead of hate, our marriage is my foundation, and Robbie is my solid rock. We have to be for one another, putting the bonds of our union through the ringers and back, as neither of us expected my past life eventually to come back and haunt me after so long. Our blissful life came to a sudden halt one day when we were out visiting my in-laws at their nearby house on just another plain afternoon. There's a knock on the front door, and my father-in-law got up from watching TV on the couch to answer it. I rushed back quickly, coming into the dining room, where I was feeding my 19-month-old and 5-month-old boys at the table. And he blurted out, "Jenna, there are 3 police officers at the door asking for you by the name of Virginia Roberts." I asked my mother-in-law to stay with the babies to find out what this was all about. I didn't even think it had anything to do with Jeffrey at first and wasn't even worried when I opened the door to offer them to come inside. They weren't actually police officers, but 2 federal agents of Australia and 1 FBI agent from America. The American agent asked if I wouldn't mind actually come outside so that I may speak with them in private. Okay, I said, as well as mentally preparing myself for something big from the look of it. It's not over a parking ticket or anything small that you get 3 federal agents knocking at your in-laws' front door asking to speak in private. Can we first ask you if you are in fact Miss Virginia Roberts and originally from Palm Beach County in the United States? I confirmed my name and previous state of residence that they even asked. May we see some identification, please? Should ask them for identification. A different agent asked the question this time and told him, "I will have to go and grab it. My purse is inside. I'll just be 1 second." Bobby was standing on the other side of the door, trying to figure out what they were doing here talking to me. And when I rushed through it to grab my purse and saw him standing there looking puzzled, I told him I had no idea what this was about yet. But not to worry, everything was going to be just fine. Taking a deep breath and slowly exhaling outwards, I opened the door to find out exactly what the agents wanted to talk about. Pulling out my Australian driver's license from my wallet, I was going to hand it over to them, but they were sufficed at a quick glance. There was no meet and greet. They went straight to the point. One agent picked up a briefcase off the porch floor and open it up, taking out a stapled stack of paper. Then that same agent asked me if I had ever known an affiliate by the name of Mr. Jeffrey Epstein. All of a sudden, my stomach tangled in a familiar knot that I hadn't felt in many years from a past life that I was trying to forget about. I nodded in affirmation of their question and said, "It was a long time ago, and he's no longer an affiliate of mine, but yes, I did know him once. It was shameful enough to think about, let alone talk about with him for the first time since I had started my entire life over." His next response left me nothing short of speechless. The United States Attorney's Office for the District of Florida was giving me a notification of being an identified victim. Jeffrey was finally caught for his atrocious acts of perversion on girls who were barely old enough to even comprehend the birds and the bees, so to speak. On June 30th, 2008, Jeffrey Epstein pleaded guilty for procurement of minors to engage in and solicitation of prostitution. More than a dozen girls have been named as victims of Jeffrey's federal offenses, and without ever stepping a day in court, he was granted a plea bargain, consenting to charges that named him a registered pedophile for only 2 of the minor girls, getting away with even serving only 12 of the sentenced 18th months behind bars, be that in the evening alone, and in the morning he was released during the day. Restricted to the confinement of his lavish mansion in Palm Beach, only to be with his original sex slaves from over 10 years ago, Nadia Marchinkova and Sarah Kellen. And knowing Jeffrey all too well, they wouldn't be the only ones there while he was pulling his laughing stint of retribution. Even at nighttime, the girls were still allowed to visit him, accounting to nearly 70 times while serving his time in incarceration. No justice had been served for any of us victims. Denied the very constitutional rights allegedly there to protect and serve us. We weren't allowed to have a voice in front of a jury and judge, or even be informed. Okay, I don't know what happened. I lost connection. I'll pick up where I left off. Fix this a little bit. That's better. I felt my knees go weak, and the anxiety churning in my stomach was now making me feel sick. taking the bundle of paperwork from the agent, who was now handing it over to me. I had to excuse myself before my legs actually buckled. Closing the door behind me, I couldn't even find the words to tell my husband what was going on. I rushed to the back of the house and went out to the backyard, where I wanted a minute to compose myself and process the information I had just been told. Robbie followed behind me, but the stillness in my eyes convinced him to give me that moment to compile my emotions. A few moments later, and I was ready to talk. Collapsing into his arms with such anguish, he just held me until my sobs subsided and I was able to tell him what actually happened. Starting with an apology, I began to tell him how I was so sorry, but my troubled past has come back to plague our simply sweet lives and was about to turn it all upside down. He was so understanding from the beginning of all this, telling me that he will always be behind every choice that I make in mending the sorrows of my tormenting past. And there he has been through all the thick and thins. Deciding to call the lawyers on the victim suit provided for me was a big decision, but one I had to do to seek the unanswered questions from my battered heart. The two women at the firm that I spoke to treated me so wonderfully. Like long-term friends, they counseled me not only in the terms of a lawsuit towards Jeffrey, but also in the matters of being emotionally and sexually abused. I chose to proceed with the lawsuit at least to make a statement to a man that tried to make a degraded statement about me so long ago. Now it was my turn. I had the choice to turn the tables on him, hoping he would feel embarrassed and in the spotlight for everyone's entertainment, where he had kept me for so many years. Winning my lawsuit against him was not enough to heal old wounds. I never got the chance to stand up in front of a jury and tell them how much pain I had endured and still endure throughout the many nightmares I face when darkness hits and the silence of the sleeping household fills my head with pictures of reliving my past with him or the others he sent me to. Or did I, nor did I even get to hear him confess his guilt and suffer the way I did, locked in confinement for many years. No, instead I got to see a picture of Jeffrey with a very youthful looking teenager, if even that, parading the streets of New York, the very way he had with me and with so many other girls before. As if it were a public display intended for not only his many victims to see, but also a spectacle for the public justice system. It was a bold show of insolence laughing in our faces while we all sat by, not being able to do anything to help these young girls from the streets still suffering his perverted afflictions. Not much longer, there was another story on Jeffrey I saw in the papers of him and Prince Andrew having a stroll together in Central Park. It instantly sparked my concerns for other girls in the very same position I was in so long ago. And he was obviously up to the same old tricks. I had to do something now. Not being able to sit by any longer with the knowledge of being able to help out in some way. I had to tell my story, no matter how shameful it was to even speak about. Putting my shame aside, I had to derive every bit of courage I could sustain, and now am ready to tell it. The hardest lesson I had failed at learning until later on in my life became my strength. The belief in my inner voice and the ability to speak up. I do have a voice, and now the world is going to hear it in my whispered cries for justice. Swept away by a surge of media with one phone call, I sent Jeffrey's publicist into frenzy. Not to mention the release of the photos showing the first night the Prince Andrew and I shared together that I so happened to unveil for the public to see. I spent too much of my life going out of my mind, waiting for the rescue that never came until it was too late, and then the scars were already embedded deeply within. Thankfully, I'm now free from the struggles that nearly destroy the love inside my heart. I only wish it could be the same for other victims, not just of Jeffrey's inflictions, but every person who has ever suffered at the hands of another. I'm here to tell you from my own experience that the moon is yours if that's what you want. All you have to do is stand up and take it. If some girls off the streets of Florida, like me, can stand up against the tyrants that run the deep pockets of our world, then anyone can. Just like I needed to believe that someone stood up for me once, like Robbie did long ago. I now stand up for us. For all of us girls. The ones who are still on the streets and think they don't deserve better, or it's an unachievable dream to be entitled to more out of life. For all of the beautiful girls who don't see beyond their outside appearance, for all the girls still trapped in enslavement and unable to get out of the abuse that holds them down. But most of all, I stand up for every girl's belief in love, because it is the very savior of my spirit and soul. The End. Written by Virginia Roberts. Okay, I will continue with Exhibit D in my next video of the Epstein files. Let's check out the comments. It just occurred to me, actually, just kind of responding to what Kay just said, to maybe make a timeline of all events. So I don't think anybody's done that yet. I mean, Ryan has his map, which I think I should be getting in the mail pretty soon here. But I don't think I've seen a timeline, so that's something I might look into doing. Shout out to ANC Report for the wallpaper, my background. Got some Jews behind me. Some evil Jews. There's Mr. Epstein, Mr. Weinstein, and the Queen on the chessboard. Miss Maxwell. If you guys enjoyed this, let me know. Hit the like button. Subscribe if you so desire. It's free to do so. If you want to support the channel in a big way, feel free to check out my Patreon, PayPal, GoFundMe, or Subscribestar. You can make a one-time donation, or you can do Patreon for as little as $1 a month. And if you have any suggestions for interviews or stuff I should cover, feel free to leave it in the comments, or you can DM me on any of my socials, including Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I respond quickest on Instagram, and then Twitter, and then Facebook, because sometimes Facebook actually doesn't notify me if I get a message, and their page messaging system is actually kind of convoluted and just annoying to deal with sometimes. So feel free to hit me up on one of those other social media websites if you so desire, and check out my brand YouTube, Merodium account over there. They are quite supportive of my work over on BNT. I also have a BitChute if people want to check that out as well. I use it as backup, and both websites are very pro First Amendment, which is excellent, very pro free speech. Cheers. Stay frosty. All the best. And until next time on the Epstein Files, people.